Hey everyone and welcome back to our channel. Today, we re-diving deep into the life of one of history's most notorious figures, the Roman Emperor Caligula. Now, when you hear that name, you probably think of madness, tyranny, and extravagance. But the story of how he got to that point is absolutely fascinating. And it starts with a much more promising beginning. Believe it or not, Caligula wasn't even his real name. He was born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus into the most powerful family in Rome. Think of them as the ultimate celebrity dynasty of their time. His father was the beloved General Germanicus, a Roman hero, and his great-grandfather was the one and only Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Talk about having some serious connections. As a little boy, Gaius spent a lot of time on military campaigns with his father. He was basically the army's mascot. The soldiers adored this little kid running around the camps. To make him feel like one of them, they crafted a tiny, miniature legionary uniform for him, complete with tiny military-style sandals, called Caligula. Seeing this little boy in his soldier outfit, they gave him an affectionate nickname, Caligula, which literally means little boots. It was a cute, endearing name given by hardened soldiers to their commander's son. Little did they know that this nickname would be the one that history would remember forever. Fast forward to the year 37 AD. The old and gloomy Emperor Tiberius dies, and the throne is up for grabs. The people of Rome, and more importantly, the powerful Praetorian Guard, chose Caligula to be their new leader. And let me tell you, Rome went wild with joy. The city erupted in celebration. Why? Because Caligula was everything the previous emperor wasn't. He was young, charismatic, and the son of their hero, Germanicus. The future looked incredibly bright. For the first few months of his reign, Caligula was the perfect emperor. It was like a golden age had dawned on Rome. He started by giving generous bonuses to the military, which kept them loyal. Then, he turned his attention to the people. He slashed unfair taxes that had been burdening citizens. He recalled political exiles who had been banished under Tiberius, and, in a huge public spectacle, he burned the records of their treason trials, signaling a fresh start for everyone. And Caligula knew how to throw a party. He organized lavish chariot races, gladiator games, and theatrical plays that went on for days. He was giving the people exactly what they wanted. Bread and circuses. He seemed generous, kind, and just. He freed prisoners who were unjustly held and put an end to the network of informants that had created a climate of fear under Tiberius. Romans looked at their new emperor and thought, "This is it. This is the leader we've been waiting for." He was praised as a liberator and a true man of the people. But this period of goodwill and celebration, this honeymoon phase between Caligula and Rome, was tragically short-lived. Just a few months into his reign, something happened that would change everything. Caligula fell gravely ill. The entire empire held its breath, praying for the recovery of their beloved young emperor. He did recover, but when he emerged from his illness, he was a different man. The kind, generous ruler seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone unpredictable, cruel, and paranoid. The little boots that had once charmed the legions were now about to trample all over Rome. And that's where the story takes its dark and infamous turn. We'll explore the madness, the scandals, and the shocking downfall of Caligula in our next video. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey back in time, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories from history. See you next time. Ever wondered what happens when one person has too much power? Let's travel back to ancient Rome, a world of grand monuments and epic battles, but also a place where the emperor's word was law. In this sprawling empire, the emperor held power that was, for all intents and purposes, limitless. There were no checks, no balances, no system designed to stop a ruler who went too far. Imagine a government where the most powerful person answers to no one. That was the reality for a Roman emperor. Sure, the Senate still existed. You've probably seen them in movies. Those men in togas debating in a grand hall. But by the time of the emperors, the Senate was mostly for show. They were a shadow of their former selves, often too afraid to challenge the emperor's decisions. They knew that defying him could cost them their property, their status, or even their lives. The emperor's favor was everything, and his displeasure was a death sentence. So, if the Senate couldn't stop him, what about the army? The mighty Roman legions were the most powerful military force in the world. Couldn't they keep a tyrannical emperor in check? Well, the army's loyalty was owned to an idea like the Republic or the people. Their loyalty was to the man who paid them and gave them a chance for glory and land upon retirement. The emperor controlled the treasury and handed out the honors. As long as the soldiers got their pay and their bonuses, they followed his orders, no matter how strange or cruel those orders might be. The army was a tool of the emperor, not a check on his power. This brings us to one of history's most notorious figures, Caligula. His name has become synonymous with tyranny and madness. Caligula inherited this system of absolute power, and he seemed determined to test its limits every single day. He wasn't just a ruler. He was a performer on a grand stage, and the entire Roman Empire was his audience. He seemed to relish pushing boundaries, to see how far he could go before anyone, would dare to stop him. Caligula's reign is filled with stories that blurred the line between historical fact and sensational rumor, but they all point to a man who saw other people not as fellow humans, but as playthings. For his amusement, he treated senators, soldiers, and citizens like objects, there to serve his whims. He understood the system perfectly. The Senate was weak, and the army was loyal to his purse. He used this to his full advantage, believing that his personal desires were more important than any concept of morality, tradition, or justice. One of the most famous stories about Caligula is his supposed plan to make his favorite horse Incitatus a consul. Now, historians debate whether he was serious or if this was a dark, twisted joke. Either way, think about what it meant. He was showing the Senate that his horse was more worthy of high office than any of them. It was a calculated insult, a way of demonstrating his complete and utter contempt for the established order. It was selling your traditions mean nothing to me. I can do whatever I want, and you are powerless to stop me. His personal life was just as chaotic. Aeod labis, wasteful parties, while the state treasury dwindled. He was said to have turned the palace into a brothel to raise money, forcing the wives and daughters of senators to participate. He would execute people on a whim, often for his own entertainment. He declared himself a living god and demanded that people worship him, building temples in his own honor, whether driven by madness, arrogance, or a cold, calculated desire to dominate. Caligula's actions showed a man who believed he was above humanity itself. The story of Caligula is a chilling reminder of what can happen when power is concentrated in the hands of one person without any real oversight. It shows how a system designed to be run by one can be easily corrupted by one. The Roman Empire created a position so powerful that it could elevate a man to the status of a god on earth, but it had no safety mechanism for when that man turned out to be a monster. Caligula's reign may have been short, lasted less than 4 years, but it left a... What was it really like to be a woman in ancient Rome before the infamous Caligula took the throne? It's a story far more complex and fascinating than you might think. Forget the Hollywood cliches for a moment. Roman society, for women, was a world of strict rules, but also one of surprising influence and quiet power. Let's dive into the reality of their daily lives. For most Roman women, their world revolved around 3 core duties: honoring their family, managing the household, and raising the next generation of Romans. This wasn't just about chores. It was about upholding the very fabric of society. A woman's life was deeply tied to her family's name, or gens. Her actions, her reputation, her dignitas, directly reflected on her father, her husband, and her sons. Honor was everything. A single public scandal, a whisper of impropriety, could bring ruin not just to her, but to her entire family's standing and future prospects. The pressure was immense. Now, you might be thinking this sounds incredibly restrictive, and in many ways it was. Legally, women had limited rights. They couldn't vote, hold public office, or serve in the military. They were technically under the lifelong guardianship of a male relative. First their father, then their husband. But don't mistake legal status for a lack of influence. Within the home, the Roman matrona was queen. She was the domina, the mistress of the house, managing vast estates, overseeing finances, directing slaves, and ensuring the household ran like a well-oiled machine. This was a massive responsibility, especially for the elite. These wealthy women were also the master weavers of Rome's intricate social fabric. While men debated in the Senate, women were building alliances behind the scenes. They arranged strategic marriages for their children, hosted lavish dinner parties where political deals were informally struck, and maintained the social networks that were crucial for a family's success. Their advice was often sought and valued in private, and a clever woman could subtly steer her husband's career and her family's fortunes from the drawing room. They were the silent partners in the great game of Roman politics. And it wasn't all about politics and housekeeping. Women were also patrons of the arts, commissioning statues and buildings. They were business owners, managing properties, lending money, and running workshops that produced goods like textiles and bricks. We have inscriptions and legal documents that show women engaged in all sorts of commercial activities, proving they were far from idle. They found ways to exert their will and build their own legacies within the constraints of their society. Of course, life was very different, depending on your social class. For a poor woman living in a crowded city apartment, or insula, life was a daily struggle for survival. She might work as a weaver, a market seller, a laundress, or a midwife. Her concerns were more immediate, putting food on the table and keeping her children safe. For enslaved women, life was even harsher, completely at the mercy of their owners. Their experiences were a world away from the powerful matrons of the senatorial class. So, the picture of a Roman woman before Caligula is not one-dimensional. It's a mosaic of duty and influence, restriction and opportunity. It was a patriarchal society, no doubt, but one where many women navigated their roles with intelligence, resilience, and grace. They were the bedrock of the Roman family, the quiet influencers of the Republic and early empire, and the keepers of tradition. Their stories, though often whispered rather than shouted, are an essential part of understanding the true. Step into the shadowy corridors of ancient Rome, where power wasn't just wielded, it was flaunted with terrifying cruelty. Today, we're delving into the mind of one of history's most infamous emperors. Caligula. Was he a madman, a monster, or something far more calculated? Let's find out. Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known as Caligula, ascended to the throne with the adoration of the people. He was the son of the beloved general Germanicus, and his early reign was full of promise. He gave bonuses to the military, abolished unfair taxes, and freed citizens who had been unjustly imprisoned. Rome breathed a sigh of relief. But this honeymoon period was tragically, after a severe illness, something in Caligula snapped. The benevolent ruler vanished, replaced by a tyrant who saw the world as his personal playground and its people as his pawns. He began to operate on a simple, chilling philosophy. People were not individuals with hopes and dreams, but tools. Tools for his amusement, instruments for his control, and props in his theater of fear. Caligula had an insatiable appetite for shocking Roman society and shattering its most sacred traditions. He craved the gasps of horror from the Senate and the fearful whispers of the public. It wasn't enough to be emperor. He needed to be a living god, and gods are not bound by mortal rules. He famously declared his favorite horse Incitassa, a consul, decking him out in a marble stall with an ivory manger. While this sounds like a joke, it was a profound insult to the Senate, essentially saying, "My horse is more competent and worthy of respect than any of you." This desire to humiliate and control was a constant theme. He would force senators, the most powerful men in Rome, to run alongside his chariot 4 miles, dressed in their formal togas. He would interrupt their banquets with sudden, terrifying pronouncements of death sentences, only to laugh it off as a joke moments later, leaving them trembling and unsure if they would survive the evening. This psychological warfare kept everyone off balance, cementing his absolute authority through sheer unpredictability. Nowhere was his cruelty more apparent than in his treatment of women, particularly those from noble families. For Caligula, these women were more than just people. They were strategic assets. Harming them was a direct and deeply personal attack on their husbands, fathers, and brothers to very men who held power and influence in Rome. Imagine being a respected senator at one of Caligula's lavish banquets. In the middle of the feast, the emperor might casually inspect your wife, openly commenting on her appearance before leading her away to a private chamber. He would then return to the party, loudly proclaiming her performance to all the guests, including her mortified husband. This wasn't just a personal violation, it was a public spectacle of dominance. It sent a clear message. Your honor, your family, your wife, none of it is safe from me. I own everything, including you. He forced noblewomen into prostitution in the palace, turning their degradation into a source of revenue for the state and, more importantly, a source of his own twisted amusement. These weren't random acts of depravity. They were calculated moves to strip the Roman elite of their dignity and power. By defiling their women, he symbolically castrated the men of the aristocracy, proving that their status meant nothing before his divine will. Caligula's reign of terror was a masterclass in using fear as a political weapon. He ruled not through respect or admiration, but by making everyone from the highest senator to the common citizen live in constant dread. His infamous quote, "Let them hate me, so long as they fear me," perfectly encapsulates his philosophy. Fear was the ultimate form of control, but a reign built on such foundations cannot last. The fear Caligula inspired eventually curdled into a desperate desire for liberation. After just 4 years of tyranny, the very people he terrorized decided they had had enough. In 41, members of the Praetorian Guard, his own bodyguards, conspired against him. They cornered him in a palace corridor and brought his brutal reign to an even more brutal end. Caligula's story is a chilling reminder of what happens when absolute power falls into the hands of someone who lacks all empathy. He saw humanity not as something to be cherished, but as something to be broken for sport. He wasn't just a mad emperor. He was a methodical architect of fear who turned the Roman Empire into his personal theater of cruelty. What do you think? Was Caligula a misunderstood ruler, or was he true? In the grand theater of ancient Rome, one currency held more value than gold, more power than armies: public image. For the Roman elite, your reputation, your dignitas, was everything. It was the bedrock of your social standing, your political influence, and your very identity. Lose your honor, and you lost it all. And no one understood this better or exploited it more cruelly than the Emperor Caligula. Caligula wasn't just a tyrant in the political sense. He was a master of psychological warfare. He wielded public humiliation as his sharpest and most terrifying weapon. His targets, the powerful senators and noble families who might one day challenge his absolute rule. He didn't always need to execute them. Instead, he chose a slower, more insidious method of destruction. He attacked their honor through the women of their families. Imagine being a Roman senator, a man of immense pride and public standing. Now imagine the emperor, the most powerful man in the world, publicly summoning your wife or daughter. He might force her into scandalous acts at a banquet, sell her in a mock auction, or boast of his conquests involving her to the entire court. The act itself was a brutal violation, but its true purpose was to shatter the family's public image. In Roman society, the honor of a family was intrinsically linked to the virtue of its women. By publicly debasing a senator's wife or daughter, Caligula wasn't just committing a personal crime. He was staging a public spectacle of dishonor. He was sending a clear and chilling message to everyone. This man cannot even protect his own family. His honor is worthless. He is weak. Once that stain was applied, it was nearly impossible to wash away. The whispers would start, then the snickers, then the open contempt. Other powerful families would distance themselves, fearing association. Political alliances would crumble. The family's social protection, built over generations, would evaporate overnight. Their influence in the Senate would wither. They would become social outcasts, stripped of their power and left isolated and vulnerable. For the women at the center of these horrifying ordeals, the experience was often considered a fate worse than death. They were not just victims of a physical act. They were living symbols of their family's downfall. In a society that judged women's virtue so harshly, living with that public shame was a relentless torment. It destroyed their inner peace, their social identity, and any hope for a respectable future. They were trapped, branded by the emperor's cruelty, forced to navigate a world that now saw them only through the lens of their humiliation. Caligula's methods reveal a deep, cynical understanding of Roman culture. He knew that in a world obsessed with appearance and reputation, a public wound to a family's honor could be more effective than a sword to the throat. He turned the very values that held Roman society together, honor, family, and public perception, into instruments of terror. By attacking the women, he didn't just break individuals. He broke the entire patriarchal structure that gave his rivals their strength. It was a calculated, sadistic strategy that solidified his power and left a trail of ruined lives and shattered legacies in its wake, a dark testament to how reputation could be both built and utterly destroyed in the Roman world. Thanks for watching. If you found this glimpse into the darker side of Roman history interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories you might not have heard in school. See you next time.